Golf fans have spent years waiting for one moment, the PGA Tour and LIV Golf finally becoming one league. That moment may now be further away than ever. PGA Tour CEO Brian Rolapp has delivered a blunt, three-word answer to the merger question. Speaking to Bloomberg News, Rolapp said, "There's no merger, no conversations, we've been really concentrated on the PGA Tour." For words that end years of speculation in a single sentence. But behind that statement sits a much bigger story, one involving billions of dollars, superstar players, a wave of young talent, and a restructuring plan that points directly toward the year 2028. To understand why this moment matters, it helps to remember how different professional golf looked before LIV arrived. Players had only one major path to the top. Then LIV Golf entered the picture, backed by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF, and everything changed. Massive financial offers reshaped the player market almost overnight. The PGA Tour suddenly had a direct competitor with the resources to poach its biggest names. Professional golf, which had operated as a single connected world for decades, split into two. That split appeared to end in June 2023, when the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, and LIV Golf's backers announced a framework agreement to unify the game. It felt, to many observers, like a surrender. But nothing ever came of that agreement. The two sides drifted in different directions for years afterward, and the framework quietly stalled. Since then, fans have repeatedly heard rumors about a renewed agreement, fueled by leadership changes on both sides and periodic reports of behind-the-scenes talks. Now, more than 3 years later, Rolapp's comments appear to close that chapter entirely. Rolapp is not a golf lifer. He joined the PGA Tour after 20 years at the NFL, where he served as the league's chief media and business officer. That background matters, because it shapes how he is approaching the tour's next decade, not as a series of individual tournaments to protect, but as a media and entertainment product to be restructured for growth. One of his first major moves was creating the Future Competition Committee, chaired by Tiger Woods and made up of 6 players and 3 business executives, including John Henry, majority owner of the Boston Red Sox and part of the Strategic Sports Group, which invested $1.5 billion into the PGA Tour, along with former Red Sox and Cubs executive Theo Epstein. That committee has been central to shaping the restructuring plan now aimed at 2028. So if there is no merger, what exactly is the PGA Tour's alternative? The answer is one of the most significant structural changes professional golf has seen in years, and it centers on the year 2028. According to reporting from Bloomberg and confirmed through Rolapp's own comments, the PGA Tour is building a 2-tier competitive structure set to launch in 2028. At the top sits the Championship Series, reserved for the best players in the world and the sport's biggest events. Below it sits the Challenger Series, designed as a feeder league for rising stars and for veterans working their way back into the top tier. Rolapp first outlined pieces of this plan months earlier at the Travelers Championship, and the details have continued to take shape since. The second tier deserves particular attention, because it could determine whether the PGA Tour can develop its next generation of stars from the ground up. Consider a young golfer without a famous name or an established following, someone whose only asset is results on the course. In a genuinely merit-based system, that player has a route upward, perform well in the Challenger Series, and earn a place in the Championship Series. For veterans, the same structure works in reverse. A Challenger Series appearance is not a demotion so much as a documented route back to the top level, based on results rather than reputation. This kind of restructuring is not without precedent in professional sports, where top-end developmental tier systems have long been used to widen the talent pipeline while still protecting the commercial value of the top competition. What makes the PGA Tour's version notable is the scale of the change. It represents the most significant structural overhaul of the professional golf calendar since LIV Golf first entered the market, and it is being built specifically as a response to the competitive pressure LIV created. Rolapp pointed directly to one such player when discussing the new system, 17-year-old Miles Russell. Speaking to Bloomberg TV, Rolapp said of the pathway, "We've opened up the meritocracy of golf." He added that if a player like Russell is good enough, the tour has built a system for him to work his way up through the ranks rather than needing existing fame or sponsor exemptions to break through. This is not a hypothetical concern for the PGA Tour. Recent tournament results reinforce exactly the point Rolapp is making. 21-year-old Jackson Koiven won the 3-meter Open in just his third professional start. 24-year-old Michael Thorbjornsen won the Rocket Classic. 23-year-old Ben James held the lead at the Wyndham Championship. Each result signals the same trend: a new generation of golfers is already breaking through, and the tour's restructuring is built around accelerating that shift rather than resisting it. But talent development is only half the equation. A system has to give players a reason to stay rather than look elsewhere, and that is where LIV Golf re-enters the story, this time from a position of considerable weakness. LIV Golf changed professional golf when it launched. That much is not in dispute. It introduced a new team-based format, signed a number of the sport's biggest stars, and forced the PGA Tour to respond with structural and financial changes of its own, particularly around player compensation. But the question LIV faces today is fundamentally different from the one it faced at launch. In its early years, the question was whether LIV could attract elite talent. It answered that question decisively. Today's question is whether LIV can remain financially sustainable at all. The numbers behind that question are significant. Reports indicate that Saudi Arabia's public investment fund has pulled its planned funding for LIV Golf and is now providing the league with loans instead, simply to get it through the remainder of the season. According to reporting, LIV has received only a fraction of its originally promised backing, a shortfall that has already led to postponed events and a scramble for outside financing just to reach 2027. Separately, reported player contract obligations connected to LIV have been estimated at more than $250 million, underscoring the scale of the financial commitments the league is trying to manage even as its primary funding source pulls back. This matters because attracting star players was only ever the first step. Building a durable sports organization requires long-term financial stability, a reliable fan base, sustained commercial partnerships, and enough weekly interest to keep broadcasters and sponsors engaged. LIV Golf is no longer simply competing for the world's best players. It is competing for its own long-term survival, and that repositioning changes the entire dynamic between the two tours. The financial strain has already produced visible consequences. Events have reportedly been postponed as the league works to secure outside funding to replace the support it expected from the PIF. That funding gap is significant given how central Saudi backing has been to LIV's business model since its launch. The league was built on the assumption of sustained, long-term investment rather than the loan-based bridge financing now reportedly keeping it operational. Whether LIV can convert that bridge funding into a stable, long-term financial structure before 2027 may ultimately determine whether the league exists in its current form at all. That shift has not gone unnoticed inside LIV's own locker room. Bryson DeChambeau, one of LIV's most prominent stars and the captain of Crushers GC, held a 30-minute players' meeting at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster amid the uncertainty surrounding the league's finances. Clique's GC's Richard Bland described the mood in that meeting as positive, though he indicated real questions remained about future investment and whether the LIV Golf Team Championship in Michigan would proceed as scheduled at the end of the month. Korean Golf Club's Benon added that the meeting stayed constructive, joking that no punches were thrown, a comment that itself hints at how tense the atmosphere around LIV's finances has become. DeChambeau, for his part, has continued to publicly back the league's future. He has stated he is confident in LIV continuing beyond the current season and has argued that any merger conversation requires both sides to compromise. Speaking earlier this year, DeChambeau said reaching a deal requires a little bit of everybody kind of just lowering their guards. He has also pointed to the value of LIV's franchise structure, arguing that individual teams within the league carry a value approaching $200 million each, an asset, in his view, that the PGA Tour would need to account for in any future negotiation. Other LIV players, including Cameron Smith, have also expressed openness to a reunified structure in the past. Executives can issue statements, and tours can redesign their formats, but ultimately it is the players who hold the power to reshape the sport. That has already been demonstrated once. When a wave of major names left for LIV Golf in 2022, professional golf changed almost overnight. The same dynamic could work in reverse. If several prominent LIV players were to move back toward the PGA Tour, or if the Tour's new pathway convinces enough emerging stars to stay rather than test the open market, the competitive balance between the two organizations could shift again just as quickly. This is precisely why the fight for young talent carries such weight. If the PGA Tour can offer a genuinely clear, merit-based route to its top tier, it becomes significantly more attractive to the next wave of golfers before rival leagues even get the chance to make an offer. Win that competition for emerging talent, and the PGA Tour secures an advantage that compounds over the following decade. There is also a commercial dimension to this competition that extends beyond any single-player signing. Sponsors and broadcasters evaluate leagues on predictability, consistent events, a stable calendar, and a recognizable path for new stars to emerge. A tour that can point to a defined pipeline of emerging talent, backed by actual results like Koivin's, Thorbjornsen's, and James's, offers a more attractive long-term partner than a league still working to stabilize its own funding. That is part of why the timing of the PGA Tour's restructuring, arriving while LIV manages its financial challenges, is being read by many in the sport as more than coincidental. So does Rolapp's "no merger" comment mean a deal will never happen? Not necessarily. Based on his comments, there is currently no active merger conversation being pursued by the PGA Tour. That is a different statement from never. Leadership changes. Financial pressures shift. Player rosters evolve. Business priorities move. Nobody can state with certainty what professional golf will look like several years from now. In fact, even LIV Golf CEO Scott O'Neill has previously acknowledged a working relationship with Rolapp, noting the two attended Harvard Business School together and describing him as a capable dealmaker, language that leaves the door only partly closed, even as the current public position is firmly against a merger. It is also worth noting that this is not the first time a PGA Tour executive has spoken about reunification in warmer terms. Back in 2024, during the period when the framework agreement was still technically active, then leadership described being open to a return to a unified world tour, while acknowledging that the whole process has probably taken a little bit longer than everyone anticipated. Rolapp's comments this week represent a clear departure from that tone, replacing open-ended patience with a definitive stop. What happens instead depends heavily on how the PGA Tour's new structure performs once it launches. If the Championship Series and Challenger Series succeed, if players embrace the pathway, if fans respond to the competition, and if young stars like Russell, Koivin, Thorbjornsen, and James continue to break through, the pressure for any merger conversation shrinks considerably. If the system underperforms, the entire calculation could reverse, and LIV, assuming it survives its current financial strain, could find itself with renewed leverage. That is why 2028 carries so much weight. It is the year the PGA Tour's restructured system is set to launch, and it will be judged not on paper but on the course. Are the sport's biggest stars competing in the Championship Series? Are the tournaments genuinely competitive? Are young players actually breaking into the top tier the way the pathway promises? Are fans tuning in consistently? A strong answer across those questions gives the PGA Tour a powerful, self-sufficient product. A weak answer reopens space for LIV, or another rival, to make its case again. The Tour can design the system on paper with every incentive aligned correctly, but paper does not decide outcomes in professional sports, performance does. A meritocratic pathway only works if players actually trust it enough to commit to it over a guaranteed contract elsewhere, and fans only invest in a tour's storylines if the competition on the course consistently delivers meaningful stakes. Both of those outcomes remain unproven until the Championship Series and Challenger Series actually run their first full season in 2028. Set the corporate and financial maneuvering aside for a moment, and the sport ultimately comes down to a simpler question: what do golf fans actually want to see? Competitive tournaments. Genuine rivalries. Pressure-filled final rounds. Unexpected winners. Young players challenging established champions. These are the moments fans remember years later, not balance sheets or corporate statements. That is the real contest between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, which organization can consistently produce the most compelling golf, because whichever side wins, sustained fan attention gains something more valuable than a single headline. It gains a durable audience. Looking ahead, 4 factors will determine how this story unfolds. First, 2028 itself, whether the PGA Tour actually delivers its new 2-tier structure on schedule and executes it well. Second, player movement, which established stars remain with their current tours, and which emerging players break through under the new system. Third, LIV Golf's financial position, whether the league can stabilize its funding beyond the loans currently keeping it running, particularly heading into 2027. Fourth, the underlying relationship between the two organizations, because a public no today does not guarantee a permanent no tomorrow. A single major player movement, a new financial agreement, or an unexpected announcement could reopen the conversation at any point. Each of these 4 factors is already partly visible in the data available today. On player movement, DeChambeau's public commitment to LIV Golf beyond 2026 stands in contrast to the uncertainty voiced privately by teammates like Bland during the Bedminster meeting. On financial position, the gap between LIV's original funding promises and its current reliance on loans is the clearest signal available of how quickly its situation has shifted since the PIF's initial commitment. On the relationship between the organizations, O'Neill's acknowledgement of his personal ties to Rolapp, the two having attended Harvard Business School together, suggests communication between the leagues has not been severed entirely, even if formal merger talks have stopped. And on the 2028 structure itself, the early performance of players like Koiven, Thorbjornsen, and James gives the tour genuine, current evidence that its meritocracy argument has substance behind it, rather than being only a talking point. There is also a broader possibility worth considering. The PGA Tour may not need to defeat LIV Golf at all. It may simply need to build a stronger product, a clearer competitive structure, a genuine pathway for emerging players, meaningful opportunities for established stars, and tournaments fans want to watch consistently. If that happens, the tour would not require a merger to come out ahead, it would only need to become the destination players and fans prefer on its own terms. But if the new system disappoints players, underwhelms fans, or fails to deliver the meritocratic pathway it promises, LIV Golf, provided it stabilizes its finances, could find itself back in a stronger negotiating position, and merger talk could return with renewed force. For years, the dominant word in professional golf conversations was a merger. Right now, the PGA Tour's public message is different: build. Build the 2-tier structure. Build a genuine competitive pathway. Build the next generation of stars, and let that growth speak for itself. LIV Golf is not disappearing immediately, it still has players, events, and at least loan-based funding to work with through the near term. Player choices remain in flux, and the overall situation is far from settled. If the 2028 system performs as intended, the central question in professional golf could shift entirely, from when will the PGA Tour and LIV merge, to does the PGA Tour even need LIV Golf at all? If the plan falls short, the story could reverse just as quickly. LIV could regain momentum, players could reconsider their positions, and the merger conversation Rolapp closed the door on this week could return stronger than before. What makes this moment different from previous rounds of merger speculation is the imbalance now sitting between the two organizations. In 2023, LIV Golf negotiated from a position of financial strength, backed by a sovereign wealth fund willing to commit billions to establishing the league. In 2026, that same backer has pulled its planned funding and shifted to loans, while the PGA Tour has spent the intervening years reshaping its prize money, tournament formats, and now its entire competitive structure in direct response to the competitive threat LIV represented. Rolapp's blunt answer reflects that shift in leverage as much as it reflects any strategic preference for independence over unification. That is why 2028 stands as the year that could define the next era of professional golf, not simply because of a new tournament format, but because it will be the first real test of whether the PGA Tour's response to LIV Golf was the right one.